Welcome back to the David Pakman Show. I'm Farron Cousins from Ring of Fire. I'll be sitting in for David all of this week. And if by chance you want more from me, you can find me on YouTube at youtube.com/FarronBalanced. And of course, youtube.com/The Ring of Fire. One of the biggest stories that is still happening this week is more and more new information continues to trickle out every couple of hours, honestly, at this point, is Joe Manchin. The biggest, baddest bad guy in the country today, Joe Manchin. And on Monday, the Huffington Post reported that Joe Manchin has allegedly, according to two insiders that Huffington Post spoke to, Manchin has been telling his Democratic colleagues that one of the main reasons he is objecting to extending the child tax credit that has lifted 30% of children in this country out of poverty is because if you give poor people money, they're just going to spend it on drugs. Now, there's no audio, at least not that I've seen or has been reported on, of Joe Manchin saying these things. So let's, mention that right off the bat. This is coming from two insiders who spoke to the Huffington Post. They said, this is what Manchin has been telling people behind the scenes. This is his talking point. If you give poor people money, they're going to spend it on drugs. So, we have to assume at the moment, or at least for the sake of this segment here, we're going to assume what they're saying is accurate. Again, without a recording of this, without it written down, Joe Manchin writing it himself, we can't say for certain that Joe Manchin did say this. So let's imagine that he did, okay? Let's imagine for a moment that Joe Manchin used this tired, worn-out Republican talking point to trash the extended child tax credit, which again has lifted 30% of children in this country out of poverty. 30%! This child tax credit that's been going out for most of this year has fundamentally changed the lives of millions of Americans. But it has become one of Joe Manchin's biggest targets in the Build Back Better bill. And is it really because he honestly thinks that poor people, if they get cash in hand, they're just going to buy drugs? Is that really what he believes? Does he honestly think that every poor person in this country, everybody living in poverty, is just on drugs? Is that what he thinks the cause of poverty and suffering is here in the United States? It's only because of drugs? If somebody is living in poverty, that in no way makes them more likely to do drugs here in the United States. Poverty is not a manifestation that comes from addiction. And it's absolutely embarrassing and irresponsible for anyone, left or right, to make that claim. And if this is in fact how Joe Manchin feels, if he did really say this to his Democratic colleagues, which I would love if any one of them would come forward and say, yes, Manchin told me this, let's confirm it. So if this did happen, I believe at this point the Democratic Party would have no choice but to kick Joe Manchin out. And I believe that they should. I believe they should kick him off of his committees. I believe that they should refuse to give him any funding from the party. Not just based on this statement either, by the way. Based on the fact that he is obstructing the Democrats' own agenda. Bernie Sanders pointed out last week in an interview with Chris Hayes on MSNBC that Manchin and Sinema were acting like Republicans. And when you look at what Republicans have done this year, nothing but obstruction. Obstruct, 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 especially in the Senate. But then when you look at Manchin and Sinema, obstruct, obstruct, obstruct. So it is as if they were acting like Republicans. Not as if, they are. That is what this is. Joe Manchin understands what Build Back Better could do to residents of West Virginia. They're not happy with him, by the way. The stories have been pouring in ever since his appearance on Fox News on Sunday about West Virginia residents unhappy that Joe Manchin is standing in the way of this. But it all comes down, at the moment, to that child tax credit. Last week, Manchin was confronted by reporters asking, why do you oppose the child tax credit? He said it was BS, your BS. This isn't true. I never said that. I never did that. But I think it was October 21st is when the news reports came out saying that Joe Manchin wants to cut down the child tax credit, wants to put a cap on it. You know, if you make over $60,000 a year, you don't get anything at all. So he wanted to lower the cap. That was reported back then. He didn't call those reports BS. So he's lying. He's lying to us. He's lying to his constituents. He's lying to the country about what he actually is trying to do. And again, if this Huffington Post report is accurate, and again, we cannot say for certain that it happened, but if this report is accurate, then he is basing his rationale for killing the extended child tax credit on faulty and fraudulent information. And that is unacceptable considering how much this bill would benefit the American public. It's not going to lead to inflation. It's not going to lead to expanded drug use here in the United States. It would help continue to lift people out of poverty. It would help people be able to afford their bills. It would help people have a way, a stepping stone to creating a better life. That is what this piece of legislation would do. Build back better. It's literally right there in the name, folks. But Joe Manchin doesn't think you should have it. Because Joe Manchin thinks you're going to go buy drugs. Absolutely sickening that this sitting Democratic member of the United States Senate would result to Republican talking points, going all the way back, by the way, to Ronald Reagan, right? The welfare queens, the people living high on the government hog, while the rest of you hardworking folks are out there working your fingers to the bone. But they're getting the free government money, not having to do anything. That's what this is. This is a continuation of the fraudulent welfare queen trope pushed by Republicans in the 80s and, of course, ever since then. Not to mention the fact, just based on statistics, we know that means testing and, of course, drug testing, welfare recipients, government assistance recipients, yields very little results. In fact, from 2011 to 2017, you had multiple states across the country enact some kind of drug testing in order to receive social welfare programs. 1%. 1% of the applicants who were tested positive for drugs. 1% over a 6-year period. So that alone kills Joe Manchin's talking point. Helps kill that age-old Republican talking point too. But apparently that wasn't enough. It didn't stop Joe Manchin from allegedly telling his colleagues that if you give poor people more money, they're just going to go spend it on drugs.
One of our sponsors is Kamikoto, making elegant, high-end, beautiful Japanese steel kitchen knives using traditional techniques from Honshu, Japan. I've been a big fan of Japanese kitchen knives for a long time. They have some great advantages. When you look closely at a Kamikoto knife, you see the quality of the ironwork. They only use Japanese steel. Every knife comes in a perfect heavy-duty ash wood box, makes storage really easy. It looks great in your kitchen or drawer. The balance of the knives is just amazing. I've been using them for everything. Every knife comes with a lifetime guarantee. On their website, you can see the complete list of chefs at Michelin star restaurants who use Kamikoto. And through this partnership they're doing with us, Kamikoto is giving you $50 off on top of their other special offers. Just go to kamikoto.com/Pacman and use the code Pacman for $50 off. The link is down below.